2009 novel by Kamila Shamsie. It was shortlisted for the Orange Prize for Fiction and won the Anisfield Wolf Book Award for Fiction. Kamila Shamsie FRSL, born the 13th of August 1973 is a Pakistani and British writer and novelist who is best known for her award-winning novel Home Fire 2017. Named on Granta magazine's list of 20 best young British writers, Shamsie has been described by the New Indian Express as a novelist to reckon with and to look forward to. 3. She also writes for publications including The Guardian, New Statesman, Index on Censorship and Prospect, and broadcasts on radio. Summary. In 4 sections, Burnt Shadows follows the intersecting histories of two families, beginning in the final days of World War II in Japan, following to India on the brink of partition in 1947, to Pakistan in the early 1980s, and then to New York in the aftermath of 9/11 and Afghanistan in the wake of the ensuing U.S. bombing campaign. In the prologue, an unidentified prisoner finds himself naked in a cell in Guantanamo, wondering, how did it come to this? The main story then begins in Nagasaki in 1945, with Hiroko Tanaka, a 21-year-old teacher-turned-munitions worker who is in love with the German Konrad Weiss. Their idyllic romance ends in tragedy, with a fatal flash that leaves Konrad a burnt shadow on the ground, and indelibly sears the birds on Hiroko's kimono into the skin of her back. In search of new beginnings, Hiroko travels to Delhi. She stays with Konrad's half-sister, Ilsa, now known as Elizabeth, and her husband, James Burden. She begins to learn Urdu with Burden's clerk, Sajjad Ashraf, with whom a relationship blossoms to the Burden's disapproval. With the partition of India, Hiroko's world turns upside down once again, and she finds a new life in newly created Pakistan. In Karachi, Hiroko and Sajjad's son Raza is born. He meets a CIA operative, who is none other than Harry Burden, Ilsa and James's son. Ilsa has meanwhile reclaimed her identity, divorced James, and moved to New York. Raza finds himself, naively, swept up into the jihadist movement in Afghanistan. When she loses Sajjad as well, Hiroko moves to New York to be near Ilsa. Though the women have not seen each other in decades, they find themselves deeply bound to each other. Harry has meanwhile extracted Raza from his unsought extremist associations, and instead, offers him a career in the private security intelligence sector. The parallel convergence of the families in New York and Afghanistan is the foundation from which both tragedy and support arise. Above ground zero, as she once stood over her destroyed home city, Hiroko becomes attached to Harry's daughter Kim, and meets an Afghani taxi driver who becomes a key player in the dramatic events that follow. Burnt Shadows was generally well received by critics. Maya Jaggi, in her review in The Guardian, praises the book as hugely ambitious, Shamsie's voices, clear and compelling, and admires the use of both Eastern and Western literary references and poetry in Shamsie's style and narratives. 5. She writes, the identity of the Guantanamo captive remains unclear till the powerful denouement, as events unfold with a malign logic whereby even a man stooping for a cricket ball can be fatally misconstrued. Any reader anticipating a predictable yarn about the radicalization of Islamist youth may feel cheated. Far more, I suspect, will feel challenged and enlightened, possibly provoked, and undoubtedly enriched. 5. Writing for The Independent, Charlie Lee Potter says, the grasp of language, the subtlety of expression and the sheer mastery of international politics are all impressive. And so, too, are the details. Family loyalties, national allegiances, betrayals, the sometimes misguided desire we have to protect our children from the truth. Like other reviews, Potter takes on the question of whether the broad strokes of history employed by Shamsie are effective, and he answers with a resounding, thumping, capitalized yes. 6. HuffPost reviewer Adrian Kelt finds one weakness in Burnt Shadows. Shamsie does a beautiful job of building worlds, only to take them away again in a sudden and breathless fashion. 7. She disagrees with Potter, finding that, at home in implication and poetics, Shamsie is able to make us draw breath at the slightest touch, and as such it's somewhat disappointing that she insists on using so many broad narrative strokes. 7. However, she also opines that, Burnt Shadows does a compelling job of implicating the world in our minute heartbreaks, of teasing out the potential for politics, however distant they may feel, to break into our seemingly self-contained existences and make hash of our plans. 7. According to the Kirkus review of Burnt Shadows, wit, formidable imagination and intricate, well-worked characterizations distinguish the twisty narrative. With a rare combination of skill and sensitivity, Shamsie generates pathos for outsiders and the displaced. 8. The San Francisco Book Review's Susan Gardner writes, throughout the sweep of political tides, as relationships and connections are made, get broken, or renewed or severed, the cast of characters expands and are superbly woven into the fabric of this beautifully written novel. 9. Shamsie is a lyrical writer, with a keen eye for detail and a poignant way of phrasing everyday observations that feel new when she voices them. Burnt Shadows Summary. Burnt Shadows is a novel in 4 sections that details the story of 2 different families and how they connect. The story begins at the end of World War II, and continues throughout the partition of India, wars in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and 9/11. As the novel opens, the reader is brought to the Guantanamo Bay detention camp, a United States military prison in Cuba. An unnamed prisoner ponders how he ended up at the highly guarded facility. The remainder of the novel seeks to answer this prisoner's question, following a timeline of events beginning in 1945. In Nagasaki, Hiroko Tanaka is a munitions worker living in Japan during the end of World War II. Her love for the German Conrad Weiss is brought to an expeditious end when an atomic bomb is dropped on the city. The tragic event leads Hiroko to seek refuge in Delhi, India, where she stays with Conrad's half-sister, Elizabeth. She falls in love with Sajjad Ashraf, who is teaching her the South Asian language of Urdu. After Sajjad's mother dies, Hiroko and Sajjad marry. They take their honeymoon in Istanbul, unaware of the fact that their departure means they will never return to Delhi due to the imminent partition. Hiroko and Sajjad have a son, named Raza. Raza eventually meets a CIA agent named Harry Burton, who is Elizabeth's son. Raza gets involved in the Afghanistan jihadist movement by posing as an Afghan. He and his young friend, Abdullah, run away to a Mujahideen training camp. Sajjad, in his desperation to find his son, reveals the name of a CIA operative at the wrong time and place and is shot and killed. Years later, Elizabeth and Hiroko end up moving to New York to try to find some stability in their lives. Elizabeth has divorced her husband James, and taken on her original identity now that the war is over. Kim, Harry's daughter, spends a lot of time with the aging women. Raza begins to work with Harry, who has left the CIA for a private contractor. After 9/11, Kim is distraught. Harry and Raza are working on behalf of the United States government in Afghanistan during the War on Terror. Raza, who has not heard from Abdullah in decades, learns that he is on the run from the FBI in New York City. At the same time, Raza is blamed for Harry's murder and has to go on the run as well. Kim and Hiroko help Abdullah cross the border to Canada. Raza is waiting for Abdullah there, and they have a conversation in a diner. Through the window of the diner, Raza can see that Kim is turning Abdullah into the police. Raza tells Abdullah to run and takes his place. Kim and Raza meet face to face for the first time as he is being taken away. Although not directly stated, it is implied that Raza was the prisoner seen at the beginning of the novel. Burnt Shadows character list. Hiroko Tanaka. Hiroko Tanaka, later Hiroko Ashraf, is the protagonist of Burnt Shadows. She is the only character who appears in every section of the novel. Hiroko is from Nagasaki. She is 21 years old in 1945 when the United States military drops an atomic bomb on Nagasaki, killing her father and her fiancé, Conrad Weiss. Hiroko later moves to Delhi, where she meets Sajjad and falls in love. They get married and after partition they move to Pakistan, where they have a son, Raza, and live happily for 35 years. After Sajjad dies in 1984, Hiroko moves to New York City. Hiroko is a strong-willed character who is suspicious of nations and religion. She judges other people on their character rather than their stereotype. She is excellent at learning languages and is fluent in Japanese, English, German, and Urdu. Conrad Weiss. Conrad Weiss is a German who was living in Nagasaki when the atomic bomb is dropped. He was studying the lives of foreigners in Nagasaki before the wartime atmosphere placed him under suspicion by the government. He was engaged to Hiroko Tanaka. Elizabeth Burton is his half-sister, they share the same father. Sajjad Ashraf. Sajjad is originally from Delhi, India. He is Muslim and his family originally intends to provide him with an arranged marriage. He works for James Burton in Delhi for 8 years in the hopes of one day becoming a lawyer. He gives Hiroko Urdu lessons while she is staying with the Burtons and they fall in love. His employment with the Burtons is harshly terminated when they falsely accuse him of trying to sexually assault Hiroko. After his mother dies, he asks Hiroko to marry him. They take their honeymoon in Istanbul, which means that they are forced to move to Pakistan instead of returning to Delhi after partition. This causes Sajjad great pain. He misses Delhi for the rest of his life. In Pakistan, Sajjad is a manager at a factory. He is shot and killed while looking for Raza, who goes missing. Elizabeth Burden. Elizabeth Burden, also called Ilsa, is a German woman living in Delhi during the British Raj. She is married to James Burden and they have one son, Harry. After partition, she leaves her husband and moves in with her cousin in New York City. While she carries prejudices against Indians as a result of her colonial status in India, she is very kind to Hiroko. James Burden. James Burden is Elizabeth's husband. He lives in Delhi with her until partition, when he moves back to the UK. He is a solicitor. Harry Burden. Harry is James and Elizabeth's son. He is sent to boarding school in England during his adolescence, leaving him constantly longing for home. He moves with his mother to NYC after she leaves his father. He falls in love with the United States and reveres it for its capitalism and acceptance of immigrants. Later in life, he becomes a CIA agent. He lives in Pakistan during the Afghan War, providing Afghan militants with weapons to support their war against the Soviets. Later, he leaves the CIA to become a private contractor that is hired by the US government. This leads him to Afghanistan during the War on Terror, where he is shot and killed by an Afghan man. Raza Ashraf. Raza is Hiroko and Sajjad's son. He was born and raised in Karachi, Pakistan. Sajjad hopes that Raza will grow up to become a lawyer. Unfortunately, however, Raza fails his exams to graduate high school 3 times. Raza is treated like he is an outsider in Karachi because he is mixed race, his mother is Japanese. Eventually, Raza makes friends with a young Afghan boy named Abdullah. They run away to a Mujahideen training camp together, which tragically also causes Sajjad's death. After his father dies, Raza moves to Dubai where he works in a convenience store with his cousins. Eventually, he gets in touch with Harry Burden who gives him a job at the private contractor company where he is working. They live near each other for 10 years in Miami, doing contractor work on behalf of the US government all over the world. This leads Raza to Afghanistan to support US interests during the Afghanistan War. When Harry is killed, Steve, Harry's ex-CIA colleague, blames Raza. Raza goes on the run and gets smuggled into Canada. There, he switches places with Abdullah, who is about to be arrested because Kim Burden turned him in. He is sent to Guantanamo Bay as a prisoner. Kim Burden. Kim Burden is James's daughter. She is strong-willed, with a fiery character. Her loved ones see her as a kind, caring, and generous person. However, she also has strong patriotic sentiment, especially after the September 11 terrorist attack. She is an engineer who specializes in constructing buildings that are safe from disaster. Abdullah. Abdullah is Raza's friend from Karachi. He is a Pashtun from Afghanistan. He and Raza go to a Mujahideen training camp in the hopes of eventually joining the Afghan war against the Soviets. After the war, Abdullah moves to NYC, where he works as a taxi driver for several years. After 9/11, he is approached by the FBI, which causes him to flee. Kim Burden smuggles him into Canada, at Hiroko and Raza's request. She ends up regretting her decision and turns him in. However, Raza takes Abdullah's place and Abdullah is able to escape to safety. Omar. Omar is a taxi driver in NYC from Pakistan. He is close friends with Hiroko. Steve. Steve is Harry's colleague in the CIA. He goes with Harry to Pakistan in the 80s and also works alongside Harry in Afghanistan in 2001. Sher Mohammed. Sher Mohammed is Harry's rickshaw driver in Karachi. He has ties to the CIA. When Sajjad identifies him in the fish harbor while looking for Raza, Sher Mohammed believes that Sajjad is there to kill him. He shoots Sajjad, killing him. Bilal. Bilal is Raza's best friend and schoolmate. He and Raza live in the same Mohalla neighborhood. Salma. Salma is Bilal's sister. She and Raza keep up a secret relationship for several months before she breaks up with Raza because she believes her parents would never let her marry him. Yoshi Wanatabe. Yoshi Wanatabe is Conrad's friend in Nagasaki. Because of the tense wartime atmosphere in Nagasaki where foreigners, especially Westerners, are under intense suspicion, Yoshi stops being friends with Conrad. He promises Conrad, however, that they will resume their friendship when the war is over. After the bomb, Yoshi helps Hiroko move to Japan. He keeps in touch with Hiroko over the following decades. He eventually dies of cancer and tells Hiroko on the phone that he regrets his past life decisions.